Now it's time for our first keynote address from our first keynote speaker, and that is Rosalind Kainyah, MBE. Now, Rosalind is a leading thinker, speaker, and pragmatic advocate for sustainability and responsible business. She has over 30 years of combined international legal, senior managerial, and board-level experience. Now, Rosalind currently serves on the boards of Discover IE PLC, Gem Diamonds Limited, CalBank PLC, Lakela Power and BTE Renewables. She is a trustee and vice chairperson of the Africa Gifted Foundation and a board member of Results for Development. She was also the founding president of the Ghana chapter of the International Women's Forum. Now, Rosalind Kainyah's keynote speech is titled Africa's Re-emergence, Meeting the Needs of the Present Generation Without Compromising the Ability of Future Generations to Meet their own. Sounds good. Let's welcome Rosalind Kainyah, MBE, to the stage.
On sustainability, I was really pleased to hear that. As has been said, I'm an advocate for sustainability, and usually when I say that, people look at me and there's this glow in their eyes thinking, amazing, she must be a do-gooder. Now, that's not bad, but actually, my focus is on sustainability and business. I have a strong and passionate belief in the transformative power of business to solve environmental and social challenges. And so my whole, my 30 years, my career is a little longer than that, but the last 30 years of my career has been spent in business, focusing very much on sustainability. So what does that have to do with our very interesting topic of African re-emergence, taking back control? The first thing I felt when I heard the topic was, as somebody of the older generation, I felt a little guilty that in 2022, we are having to have this topic by our younger generation. But I thought, well, we are where we are, so let's move forward. And it goes without saying that Africa's future depends on you in this room, you who are the future business leaders of the continent, you who can build sustainable businesses, as Professor Virgo mentioned, gave an example of, that will unlock the continent's full potential. You can do so in corporations championing sustainability, and I'll come to a definition of that because I really do believe that sustainability is the underpinning of whatever success the continent will have in future. Or you can do that as entrepreneurs, becoming agents of change by building businesses that address social and environmental issues. So this talk will look a little bit about how you can do that. So let's start off with what sustainability means. And I like to use the tried and tested definition, which was first set out in a 1987 United Nations report on our common future. It's meeting our own present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I use this as my North Star. I think it's very, very important. It doesn't say that we should give up on looking at what we need for ourselves today, but very much making sure that however we manage our resources, our current world, that we do so in a way that does not make it almost impossible for future generations to meet their own. Now, sustainability is often used interchangeably with environmental, social, and governance, ESG. But I prefer to think of ESG as the 3 plumb lines or standards that are used to measure how effectively a company is delivering on sustainability, that concept that we talked about earlier. When I think about environment in the E, I think about how well a business takes care of its physical surroundings and the natural environment that its operations would impact. So this includes things like energy use, waste management, avoiding pollution, water use, preserving biodiversity, and the efficient use of land. Social means taking care of people that can be impacted by a business's operations. When I started off in this field of environment, and this was in the early 90s, when we talked about social, we talked about communities that were impacted by a company's operations, and I worked in the mining sector then. But as the years have rolled on, social has gathered moss, and impacted communities, people, now includes your employees, your suppliers and customers, and it covers themes that you've heard of very recently, like diversity and inclusion, product safety and quality, child labor, human capital development, and I think I heard the lady over there, one of the few to-be speakers speaking about human capital development, and employee rights, health and safety, and cultural heritage. The G in ESG refers to governance, and that's about how efficiently you do your business with integrity, accountability, and transparency. This is how a company polices itself, its leadership structure, making sure that there's no bribery and corruption in the way it operates, making sure that it pays taxes that are due, having in place proper data privacy schemes and processes. Now, sustainability or ESG hasn't always been seen as value creating for business. I remember when I started off, whenever you turned up and mentioned environmental management, people actually thought you were a pain, because businesses felt that you were just going to ask them to do something that was going to cost without adding any value. So over the years, I have seen this journey of sustainability from being a pain, so to speak, to now being more value creating. Now, in 1970, now that's not when I started in my career, I'm not that old, but Milton Friedman, who has been described as the 20th century's most prominent advocate of free market, stated that there is only one social responsibility of business, and that is to engage in activities designed to increase its profits. Companies must obey the law, but beyond that, their job is to make money for shareholders. End of. And in 1997, almost 30 years later, this principle was formally adopted by the US Business Roundtable. This is an association of the CEOs of America's leading companies. And they said the paramount duty of management and of boards of directors is to the corporation's stockholders, or shareholders as we say here in the UK. The interests of other stakeholders are relevant as a derivative of the duty to stockholders. So basically, this was a time when sustainability or ESG had no place at the business table. So fast forward a bit to the 90s, and then we began to see businesses adopting CSR. You'd have heard a lot about corporate social responsibility. Now, this was mainly philanthropy. This was businesses going out to do good. I call it the building hospitals and schools without teachers or nurses period. And the highlight of this was the ribbon cutting event. And then businesses went back to do what businesses do, as they thought. We then move on to around the early 2000s, when environmental and social matters were seen as risk management. It was all about compliance. And at that time, the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank, put in place their performance, ENS performance standards. So this was more of a stick than a carrot, because basically the IFC invested in companies who in return had to develop ENS best practices aligned with these standards. Not bad at all, at least we're moving and making sure that businesses took ENS seriously. But during this time, there were also companies who saw sustainability as more than philanthropy or compliance. It was the beginning of the roots of seeing sustainability as value creating and as of mutual benefit to stakeholders more broadly than the shareholders and to companies in tangible ways. I believe we are now in a place where sustainability is actually seen as value creating, contributing to the financial bottom line of companies. And we see this because, first of all, good ESG practices attracts investment. You'd have heard of sustainable investing or impact investing, and we're finding that more and more funds are actually investing in companies that they believe are solving environmental and social challenges, or at the very minimum, are investing in companies that they believe are managing the environmental and social impacts better. So the greater the better that your ESG practices, the greater the pool of funds that you have to tap into for investment. It's also true that good, sound environmental and social performance can protect project budgets and schedules, can reduce operating costs, and can contribute to overall efficiency of operations. For example, if you find ways of using less water or less energy, that will save you on cost. And one of the things that has come up particularly throughout the COVID period is that improvements in working conditions and employee benefits helps companies to attract employees and also to retain them. And I could give lots of examples of this, but I've only given 25 minutes to speak, and I'm sure I'm more than halfway through that. And again, another value-creating aspect is reputation. Now, this is an intangible concept, I know, but having a good reputation benefits businesses in a multitude of ways. One, there's consumer preference, customer preferences. We find that now companies that have good ESG credentials attract and retain customers. It gives access to new market opportunities. And indeed, the COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated the importance of company reputation. And I'll give you an example. Unfortunately, it's not an African one, but hey, it's from a sister continent. It's from India. So India's biggest online grocery store is called Big Basket. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, to meet the increased demand that the company was facing, it employed an additional 7,000 staff. But not only did it employ this additional staff, therefore creating employment, but it also offered employees up to 50% more pay to recognize the situation that existed at the time, and offered comprehensive insurance packages around COVID. And one of the founders of Big Basket said, one of the reasons the company had decided to take these actions was a belief that after the worst of the pandemic subsided, their customers would think, this company stood by me, so I owe this company something. And at the same time, its employees would think, during a very difficult time, when companies were shedding staff or trying to cut down on costs, this company actually gave of itself to me, and therefore we retained clients. So therefore, these sort of good social practices do help with businesses' development. Now, sustainability and ESG are often thought of as Western concepts and ideals, but I'll argue that many of the ideas that underpin sustainability are closely aligned with our own values, especially ideas around community, as we heard earlier from the professor. In many ways, the S in ESG is embedded in African culture. African culture emphasizes a sense of community, a prioritization of communal happiness and good relations, with a focus on community specifically and on society generally. Across the continent, we find that small and medium-sized enterprises are often at the forefront of addressing poverty, unemployment, and inequality because of their proximity to local communities. In fact, local communities and a business's workforce are often inextricably linked. So while issues such as climate change may be perceived as distant and intangible, social needs are often immediate and pressing concerns for businesses. In communities without an effective state-organized welfare system, this role played by business is often critical for the survival and harmony of the local community. Many African SMEs undertake philanthropic activities that address socioeconomic development challenges. These are often one-off events, such as cash, food, or other material donations that meet an immediate or short-term need. The issue, however, is no matter how well-intentioned these activities are, they remain largely disconnected from the core business and are managed as something separate and peripheral. Consequently, the philanthropic activities are often viewed as a cost to business, and when times are tough, they are easily abandoned. The challenge, therefore, lies not in getting African businesses to understand and accept the importance of social responsibility, but in encouraging them to translate this belief into a long-term commitment through activities that not only have a positive and measurable impact on society, but also create value for the business. To achieve this, African businesses should focus on creating a convergence of interest between opportunities that address environmental and social issues and also deliver real business value. So, the question is, why is sustainability important for economic growth? Businesses and communities can only thrive in a strong society. So there's a mutual benefit to unleashing the power of business to help solve key societal issues. To create a sustainable economy, you need sustainable businesses that will last. Africa is currently in a challenging position, how to industrialize and achieve sustained economic growth in a way that does not further environmental and social degradation. But there are reasons to be optimistic, and there I think numerous opportunities.
Sorry.
And I think numerous opportunities that stem out of this dilemma, especially for the younger generation who on the whole are more environmentally and socially conscious. Africa does not need to follow the same path of industrialization of Europe and North America. That is why I'm not completely sold on the argument that because development economies have used fossil fuels to power their industrial development, we on the continent need to be allowed to do the same. My view is that if we do so, we'll always be playing catch-up. And I think we should be bold enough to leap forward and do what is necessary. For example, using more renewable energy, we have the natural resources to do so, and invest more in that. So, for example, environmental positive interventions in manufacturing industries can be highly effective and significantly reduce environmental degradation. The Hausa Industrial Park, which opened in July 2016, is the Ethiopian government's flagship industrial park, one that is described as Africa's first zero-emissions textile industrial park. It has a state-of-the-art infrastructure and equipment, and also there's sewage treatment that provides industrial wastewater management solutions for the park. So at this park, 85% of industrial effluent is recycled, and this is quite a significant amount. Another example is South Africa's industrial energy efficiency project that has demonstrated the potential of increased energy efficiency in industrial production in that country. So, now just before I come into examples of African businesses that I believe have shown that they can make profit as well as solve environmental and social challenges, I want to talk about climate change. Because whenever I bring up the topic of climate change, a lot of us in Africa, maybe more of my age, will go, this has nothing to do with us. This is somebody else's problem. But it is true, we contribute, Africa, less than 4% of global greenhouse emissions. A tiny portion when you consider that the richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for over half of carbon emissions. But the continent is and will be the worst affected by climate change. And I think this is something that we should truly bear in mind. Increasing temperatures and sea levels and more extreme weather are threatening human health and safety, food and water security, and socioeconomic development in Africa. According to the 2021 Global Climate Risk Index, 5 of the 10 countries most affected by climate change were in Africa. These 5 countries were Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, South Sudan, and Nigeria. In January 2022, Tropical Storm Anna caused devastation across Madagascar, Malawi, and Mozambique. Tens of thousands of homes were turned into rubble, and hundreds of thousands had to flee for safety. Just 2 weeks later, in February 2022, and this is all this year, before the country had even time to recover, 2 cyclones hit Madagascar, knocked out power grids, destroyed trees, and displaced at least 112,000 people. And to the region's horror, this wasn't the last. In March, Tropical Storm Gombe ravaged northern Mozambique and Malawi, and in April, South Africa was responding to devastating floods that swept KwaZulu-Natal province, prompting the government to declare a national state of a disaster. So I say this because even though we're nowhere near the primary contributors to climate change, we need to do something about it ourselves if Africa is truly to re-emerge and future generations able to meet their own needs. Later, I'll give examples of companies that have environment as core to their business purposes, and a number that are managing the impacts of climate change as their focus. They are not in Africa, but I give them as examples of the type of companies that we, particularly you as young people, can think about developing or setting up in Africa. So having now touched on sustainability, it has not been just a nice to do or just for risk management and compliance, but as able to create value for business. I want to demonstrate how businesses have the power to transform lives for good, operating in a way that meets our present economic, social, and environmental needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. I wanted to do so by using examples of companies across the continent, both big and small, who are implementing sustainability initiatives or building businesses that directly address sustainability challenges. So the first of these is Cold House in Nigeria, which provides solar-powered cold storage facilities that can extend the shelf life of perishable foods for 2 to 21 days. A second is My Green Home, an award-winning Rwandese company that makes building materials out of melted waste plastic and sand. And it evolved from a school project which was encouraging recycling into this business now. Another is Green Care, which makes compost from biodegradable waste. And this was also founded by a Rwandese university student. And then finally, Chanjadati in Nigeria collects, stores, sorts, and packs recyclable material to be made into new packaging. And this focus has allowed this Abuja-based recycling business to generate new income for youth and women micro-entrepreneurs, ensure healthy lives and a clean environment, and to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The examples are endless, and I'm sure many of you have several of your own. But it's not just limited to small companies. Large companies are also creating value. MTN, which I'm sure is known to a lot of us here, this is one of the telecommunications companies in Africa, wanted to make sure that it had a knowledgeable and engaged workforce. So for this reason, it created the MTN deal for employees, which emphasizes mentorship and training just as much as compensation and rewards. And it found that between 2017 and 2018, a year since the year in which it set up this initiative, the rate of turnover, employee turnover, fell from 7.1% to 4.3%, and it could directly relate this to this initiative. Then we have Safaricom, again must be known to most of us who know East Africa. And particularly in STEM-focused sectors, women remain an untapped resource of skills and knowledge. And adding more women to the workforce creates value in terms of diversity of opinion, experience, and expertise. So Safaricom's Women in Technology program targets high school students and graduates to help bridge the gender gap in the technology sector and ultimately to increase the number of talented individuals available to their company. Another company that I wanted to talk about was East African Breweries. And East African Breweries has rolled out a set of guidelines to support employees facing domestic and family abuse to disclose such abuse and seek help. And these guidelines are intended to enable employees to feel safe, to raise awareness of issues related to the matter, reach out when in need of help, and respond and refer cases of abuse at home or in the workplace. And under the guidelines, employees get paid leave of up to 10 days per year to deal with issues arising from domestic and family abuse. And they found that East African breweries found that this was appealing not just to their own women employees, but also to women customers. And the company had gone out of its way to set up such an unusual initiative. So now I turn to you as the future business leaders, the youth of tomorrow, and your role in sustainable development. I always say the world is your oyster, in spite of the many challenges that we face. Now, earlier this week, the US CNBC announced its 10th annual Disruptor 50 list. This is a list of private companies that thrived during the pandemic, meeting various economic, environmental, and social challenges. I was fascinated by the list of companies and would encourage you to take a look at the list, because I really do believe that almost all these companies, these sort of companies, are needed on the continent of Africa. What is interesting, and I know one of the questions that I get a lot, is how can African companies, particularly startups, raise funds? I know it's very challenging for African companies to get hold of the money to invest that they need to grow. But I would say that maybe some of what these companies are doing are exactly the sort of things that would attract impact funds or sustainable investment funds. So 40 of the 50 companies on this list had a social or environmental purpose as core to their business model. 8 were reducing costs in the healthcare system and reaching undeserved populations. Several were dedicated to climate change crisis. 9 had female founders, and 16 had CEOs from racial and ethnic minorities. So, for example, one of the customers, Medable, was set up to address the inequality in the world of clinical trials. Clinical trials underrepresent not just racial and ethnic groups, but women and the elderly. So Medable uses a cloud-based approach to make participation more consumer-friendly and more equitable. It allows trials to be conducted remotely so that participants do not need to attend clinics in person. Another company that I picked up was Block Power. This is a climate tech company that builds and retrofits existing buildings around renewable energy and energy-efficient concepts and technologies. Then there was Impossible Foods that addresses the threat of climate change caused by animal agriculture by investing in plant-based alternatives to meat, fish, and dairy products that use less land, water, and energy in production. And then finally, when it comes to farming, there was Monarch Tractor that makes fully electric, driver-optional tractors aimed at bringing down the cost of farming by eliminating the need for more expensive diesel fuel and increasing farm worker efficiency by enabling an operator to manage up to 8 tractors at once rather than drive just one. As I said, I thought it was fortuitous to have this list published this week when I was due to give this talk. I know that there are challenges with setting up and running businesses, but I still feel that companies like these are examples of companies that have sustainability at their core and the sort of companies that we need for the sustainable re-emergence of Africa. I will end by reminding us of the definition of sustainable development, meeting our present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. I would say that this should be our North Star as individuals and as business leaders if we do want to be part of the sustainable re-emergence of Africa. Thank you.